Good evening. Thank you for joining Mental Wealth Wednesday. I am so grateful to have a repeat guest, Dr. Tammy Daily. I am super excited to have her. She was one of my first guests when this platform was called Mental Health Check-ins. And that was like 5 years ago, April of 2020. I went to look at the graphic to see, and it was from 2020. So I'm so grateful to have her here with us today. We're going to have a great conversation about mental health conditions and how they're portrayed in the media and why this particular subject is important to Dr. Daly. So, without further ado, I would also like to express that January is Well-Being Month. And I just learned about this. Of all the mental health advocacy that I have done through the years, I didn't know that my birthday month was designated as Well-Being or Wellness Month. But it's timely for sure because a lot of people deal with stress during the holidays. It is a joyous time, but for some, it's sad. And for some, the stress can be overwhelming, trying to do for everyone gifts and food and all the things. But some people are also grieving loss, feeling sad, and just all the emotions. And as I posted, encouraging people to allow themselves to feel all the feels, all the feelings, all the emotions. That's why God gave them to us so that we can have different forms of expression. And what's important is learning how to manage our emotions. So, learn more about January and it being Well-Being Month. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce to you all Dr. Tammy Daily. Welcome, Dr. Daily.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for joining us. Please tell us a bit about you and what work you do now at the university in which you're a professor.
Yeah, I'm a senior faculty member these days. I've been teaching at the University of Mount Union in the Department of Psychology, Neuroscience, and Human Development for 33 years now, which just seems unbelievable right now. But about midway through my first 10 years, I got really interested in representations in pop culture of people with mental illness. And then I designed a course that I call Movies and Madness to kind of, in a sneaky way, trick students into studying this and learning about it. Because they read the title and they say, okay, we get to watch forgive the language, movies about crazy people. And that's the bait and switch. So they come into it thinking they're going to have fun watching movies, but they end up being activists by the end of the class. So I got started in this area mostly because I noticed a change in the early 2000s, especially in crime procedurals on network television. So this was back in the day before streaming, before you could, watch all of Criminal Minds from the very beginning on a streaming platform. But there was this big shift, I believe, starting with Law and Order, where they would provide the viewer with a diagnostic label as an explanation for criminal behavior. And it started to become a trend within the first few seasons of the original Law and Order to have a psychiatrist kind of provide you insights at about the half-hour mark of these shows, where it just became a shortcut so that the audience doesn't have to think very hard. They're like, oh, okay. So they have a diagnosis of X, Y, or Z. That explains it all. So I started digging, and by the time the show Criminal Minds, which in my opinion is the single most stigmatizing franchise there is, by the time that came out, they made a major character in the cast a person who provided that expertise. So one of the law enforcement officers is a person, or agents rather, I think they're FBI, is a person with a a psychiatry, neuroscience kind of background, who also, in a twist, has a parent with a serious mental illness.
Oh, interesting.
But at the same, they did these really convoluted things, and from a viewer point of view, it's really making that linkage between mental illness and violence, extreme violence, um, very solid for them. So I got really interested, during season 1 of that show, because I love murder. I love true crime. I always tell my students that I'm one of those true crime people who does all of the podcasts and loves crime procedurals and stuff like that. But there is a major problem in that space.
Mm,
In that, especially in fiction, you have a tendency for writers to use this shortcut of saying, rather than build an intricate backstory for someone who commits horrific crimes, we're just going to hand the audience a diagnosis so we don't have to do that work. And unfortunately, that leads to the kind of stigma that we still deal with today.
mm,
Um, so I've been teaching my class since 2003, and I have seen significant change. And I'm sure that you're aware of this as well. There are lots of ways in which, as a culture, we've developed more comfort, more willingness to discuss openly um, wellness and mental health and certain psychological disorders, certain
mhm,
mental health diagnoses. So we've gotten much better at talking about depression, at talking about anxiety. We've gotten a little bit better at talking about trauma. Not as We're not where we need to be by any means. But where we haven't gone, where I don't see the needle moving hardly at all, is disorders that involve psychosis.
right.
Schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar 1 disorder, and to a somewhat lesser degree, although I think you could make a case for it being equivalent. Some of the personality disorders, particularly borderline
Mm,
personality disorder, um, the that kind of set, still I see all the time, just
mhm,
really vivid stigmatization of people with those disorders. Um, so while we've made a lot of gains, like, my students are much more comfortable than in the beginning of my career, which I started my career in the 90s, um, where stigma was so strong that you simply did not disclose.
yeah.
Fast forward to now, most of my students will talk to me about their own mental health, their own challenges, their siblings' challenges, their boyfriends and girlfriends' challenges, their parents' issues. They're very disclosing.
Mm,
Um, but those spaces where the more serious conditions that involve behaviors that people just don't encounter most of the time, unless they're a caregiver, unless they're a family member,
yeah.
it's still based in what they've seen in film and television. And to me, that's a really significant problem, because
Mm,
and this, it's a large chunk of our population, as a culture, and we're just not doing the work to make sure that those are people who are cared for
mm.
in an adequate and humanizing way.
Yeah, that's all very interesting. And thank you for your commitment to this work and teaching students and helping them to understand this portrayal in the media, and actually maybe a call to action of being able to do something about it. Um,
Hmm.
and talking about it, which helps to decrease stigma. In terms of the portrayal, media portrayal, there could be, I think, Criminal Minds, those are based off of real stories, right?
Um,
Or fiction.
Sort of loosely.
Okay.
I think early in the show, I couldn't stomach it after about 3 or 4 seasons. I was a sporadic viewer after that point in time. Um, I think early on, they were connecting it to kind of the template from real events. But like Law and Order does that as well. They will pull things from headlines,
Right.
and Law and Order actually does it a little bit more, is to find real cases and then respin them so that they are in this sort of fictionalized environment. Um, Criminal Minds seems to kind of cherry pick and
Mm.
then escalate.
Yeah.
From the start of the first season, you had pretty much every diagnosis possible was
Right.
trotted out. Over the years, they've had at least 2 OCD killers,
Mm.
uh, which is baffling and bizarre,
Hmm.
to say the least. They've had many, many, many killers that they simply label as psychotic, but don't give a specific diagnostic label to. And that's, globally problematic in terms of linking such graphic crimes. And, over the history of that show, it's it's had to become more and more graphic every year in
Mm.
order to keep up with trends in culture. Um, and then, you think about some of the intersections where in most of the crime procedurals, they will do some other shortcutting that, in addition to connecting diagnostic labels with criminal behavior, they also try and give the audience these really cheap explanations for why the person became a person with mental illness.
Hmm.
And about, I would say, 90% of the time, it's because they have been traumatized in childhood by parents, and or uh, they were in the system. They
Mm.
were foster
Like
children.
foster. Yeah. Yeah.
They were adopted children. And particularly, um, the blame tends to be with moms. It tends to be with their mothers. So we've got this ridiculously Freudian template that writers seem to be incapable of letting go of.
Right.
And that's hard. I would say that the other 10%, it's blamed on the person, him or herself, for abusing drugs and alcohol.
Mm.
And some writers kind of cling to this belief that if you abuse drugs and alcohol, you can cause yourself to have a disorder like schizophrenia or bipolar, um, without giving any sort of nuance to the connection, and there is one, between substance use and misuse and serious mental illness. They often co-occur, but
Right.
one does not cause the other. So um, those are really disturbing trends to
Yeah.
me, and they're kind of resurfacing in some sneaky ways. My husband is fond of the the network series FBI, um, and the other night, I don't know if this is a brand new episode or not. They had the chief suspect was a person who appeared to be in a manic
Mm.
phase of bipolar disorder. They didn't call it that. They were very careful not to call it that, but they trot out the wife who talks about how he's off his meds, how she can't take care of him, she can't do this, she can't do that. So that's all just code for saying this is a person with a serious mental illness who's non-compliant with treatment and now is going to start killing people.
Oh,
And
goodness.
as it turns out, she was the main driver
Mm.
of the violence. So there's this sneaky thing where some writers are like, okay, if you have a problem with us using this as a plot device, we're just going to switch it up on you. And then the poor person with mental illness will just be the dupe
Oh.
in the situation. So it's kind of like a backhanded way of using mental illness as a way in to storylines. So to me, it's equally lazy writing
Mm.
um, to do it that way. I understand the attraction. People are mystified and confused by things like schizophrenia.
Yes.
Um, and still today, I teach my class every fall, and I still have the majority of my students tell me that their major source of information on all mental illnesses is the media.
Mm-hmm.
It's films, it's streaming, it's social media, um, YouTube and TikTok in particular, which are not healthy spaces necessarily for getting information.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on which rabbit holes you go down, you can get some good things like good support, but you can also run into some serious garbage out there.
That's very true. And then we have real life headlines
Mm-hmm.
that have some heartbreaking stories, such as Jubilant Sykes and
Mm-hmm.
Robin and Michelle Reiner. How
Yes.
do you feel about how those stories were portrayed in the media, being that, these were real life people in a real situations that
Yeah. Yeah.
ultimately came out that, mental illness was involved in the case of the Reiners, a combination of drug and alcohol use and
Right.
mental health condition. And then with Jubilant Sykes, his son having a mental health condition. And
Mm-hmm.
both families, it seemed, had a level of not disclosing
Mm-hmm.
the efforts that they made to help their children, because it was more known about uh, the Reiner's son's drug use
Yeah.
versus his mental health condition that came out later. So, in terms of these horrific murders
Yes.
by children of their parents, how do you feel the media presented that information? You feel like the media was careful in how they presented this, being that these were real lives and people that we know, but
Yeah.
ultimately children killed them?
Yeah. It's a mixed bag. Some media outlets did their level best to follow kind of AP guidelines on
Mm,
how to talk about these issues. Um, uh, where I was most kind of fixated is in the comments.
mm,
So, like, if I would go to the social media feed for NPR or AP or whatever news outlet, CNN, PBS,
mhm,
etc., when people would go and comment on the story, they would say things like, "It's no wonder." Um, they should have had him locked up long ago.
mm,
Speaking of the parents, like the Reiners, who likely come from a generation that was still deeply um, encouraged to be shamed by having a child with a mental illness, but they were also, and lots of the Reiners' friends noted, and colleagues noted that they were both fierce protectors. And I know so many parents of people with mental illness who and caregivers like yourself who have a parent with a serious mental illness
mhm.
who see themselves in that protector space. And for me, I have my one of my adult kids is on the autism spectrum. If you want to see me go mama bear, just get in my way, you know.
Yeah.
So I can relate to that. But some of the comments that people would say is, well, what did they think was going to happen?
Mm, mm,
Which is just so judgmental and cold, and it just shows how hard it is for families to communicate effectively what they're going through. Uh,
yeah.
and that's been the NAMI story from the very beginning of caregivers, parents in particular, but also siblings, children, um, who are trying to navigate systems that are not built for it. For the riders, the we're still dealing with a fragmented system that separates out treatment for drugs and alcohol. Um, it separates that from treatment for mental illness.
Hmm.
And, if especially if people go to drug rehabilitation programs, they often run into the problem of saying, you can't put any chemicals in your body. So treating your mental illness, if you do that effectively, you're also breaking the rehab rules.
Mm,
And that becomes really problematic for people if their particular rehab program really pushes that idea of you're an addict, you can't use any drugs that are psychoactive in any way. Um, and for a lot of people, if they assume that the drugs and alcohol, the addiction, is the cause, and I have no idea what was in the Reiner's heads other than I want to save my kid, and I'm probably the person who's best in a position to do that.
yeah.
I've certainly been there. Um, it can be hard for them to say, okay, if we could just get him off the drugs, then the other issues would go away. And unfortunately, that's not all, it's not that simple and it's not that straightforward.
Yeah.
Not that drug rehab is simple.
Right.
It's not. Um, and who knows what other variables are involved. From a stigma perspective, though, when I read those comments, it is just so harsh and
Yeah.
judgmental on the parents saying, they should have done this and they should have done that and they should have done this. And it's no wonder that he murdered them. They should have known that he was a lost cause from the very beginning and they should have locked him up. Um, and then, it doesn't help that you have the harsh rhetoric coming from uh, politicians
Mm-hmm.
who kind of echo those sentiments as well and essentially blame the victims, who probably didn't have a lot of support despite having lots of resources. So,
And they
yeah.
did. They invested a lot.
Mhm.
It was mentioned, I think, what, 70,000 or so a
Yeah.
year
Yeah.
for whatever treatment that they were investing in for their child. And you just try to do all that you can for a loved
Mhm.
one who is dealing with whatever issues. And when you're dealing with psychosis, that's like the game changer in terms of
Oh, absolutely.
separating it out from other, mental health conditions. And really it's like the wild card because you don't know what the person may do, could do. They don't know.
Correct. So, what's often, when we're talking about reducing mental health stigma, especially in the space where we're talking about schizophrenia, schizoaffective, bipolar, and so on, and even severe PTSD, which can have a psychosis element to it. The real challenge is trying to get people to find a way to relate to the experiences in an empathetic way. And the roadblock that I've found anyway is the fact that there is this really vivid kernel of truth.
Mm.
So we have the Reiner's case, we have the other case that you mentioned
Yeah,
that
jubilant
I'm
fight.
not yet that I'm not as familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
I remember reading 2 or 3 stories, but I haven't dug in as far as I should yet. But when you have that kernel of truth,
Mm-hmm.
if a person already has a negative stigmatizing attitude toward people with illnesses that involve psychosis and they see the headline, they're like, well, there you go. See, I was right all along. We should avoid these people. We should lock them up. We should criminalize them, and so on and so on and so on. Missing the fact that the overwhelming majority of people with these kinds of problems and experiences don't do anything violent at all. They may
Right.
do things that are unpredictable and irritating, and they may run afoul of the law, but their primary behaviors are nonviolent.
Mm.
And they're significantly more likely to be victimized than they are to be
Right.
victimizers. Um, the one other piece of the puzzle is the assumption that people tend to make, and I saw this in the comments of both of the cases we've already mentioned, where they were like noting how the people who died were really irresponsible, because eventually these people are going to kill other people outside of their family sphere. Um, and to me, that's a really dangerous assumption.
Mhm.
The people who are in most danger are the families.
Mhm.
If you have a person with a serious mental illness who does have a tendency toward aggressive outbursts, it happens. It's a small percentage, but it happens. It's the caregivers who are
Yeah.
the ones who are most likely to be victimized in those situations, or first responders,
Right.
either one, but mostly it's the caregivers who are in this catch-22 situation of um, feeling responsible, being made responsible, even if they don't feel competent to be responsible. There's pretty much nothing else,
Mhm.
right? And that is not responded to with empathy in the public at the present time.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if you've seen, there's been some stories in the last week to 10 days or so, about an actor. He was a child actor on Nickelodeon,
Oh,
and,
yes.
and he's been on the streets.
Yes.
Um, and I, I, I watched, I predicted that this was going to happen when people started following him around. I was like, somebody's going to swoop in and house him, and
Right.
it's not going to work.
Right.
And,
One of
and
his fellow former co-stars
yeah,
helped him to get a room, and I appreciate people who want to help and believe
yes,
that, what we consider the norm in terms of
hmm,
housing and food and clothing
yes,
will work. They'll appreciate that. And it's not to say that they don't, but it's just a different mind. The thought,
yes,
the understanding is not what we think it to be.
correct.
Um, and I did too, Tammy, Dr. Daly. I was like, oh, it is
Oh
very
no.
hard to do this, but he's going to
Yeah,
be disappointed and probably,
yeah.
not
It remi-
expect what will ultimately happen.
yeah,
Likely.
it reminded me of the film and the book, The Soloist,
Hmm.
um,
Yes.
where the film is not particularly true to the book. The book obviously is much better than the film, but you had, A-list people with Jamie Foxx playing
Nathan
a
Ayers.
man, yeah, Nathaniel Ayers, um,
Yes.
who in very classic schizophrenia symptom development, developed symptoms at Juilliard, ends up on the street in LA, and a reporter started to try to intervene in his life.
Yeah.
Um, now, the film unfortunately makes it more about the reporter
Mm.
being kind of saved by this person with mental illness,
Hmm.
which is I hate this terminology, but it's in the literature um, in this area. That this used to be done with indigenous people in film all the time, where you had the quote unquote noble savage
Mm.
who saves the white people from themselves by being all deep and spiritual and stuff. There's there's a part of the mental health genre in film that has a person with a mental illness who provides another person with an opportunity to grow.
Yeah.
So whether it's Rain Man or The Soloist or any, I could probably make a really long list of people who are jerks, who have problems. They run into a person who has a developmental disability or autism or a serious mental illness or whatever. And through their interactions with this dysfunctional main character, the main character becomes a better person
Mm.
as
Okay.
a result of their interactions. Um, on the plus side, the soloist did show that eventually, if especially if you read the book, um, the reporter just he has to wrap his head around the fact that his perception of what this person needs is not what this person needs.
Right. Right.
And you're not going to fix it by just getting the guy a room
Right.
or getting the guy a cello.
Mhm.
It takes a whole lot more for people to understand. For people like Nathaniel Ayers, he had been on the street for so long, um, and being outside was really a key component of his delusional system. It was very, very painful and uncomfortable for him to be in those interior spaces.
Mm.
Um, who's to say how much of that is schizophrenia and how much of that is his personality?
Right.
It's a
Yeah.
combination of both.
Yes.
Um, and that's often missed in film portrayals, where characters who could be very deep and very complex are kind of two-dimensional. They are their disorder,
Hmm.
and the assumption on the audience's part is if we just find the secret key to unlock the disorder, all will be well.
Yeah. And I
Um,
wish that was the case. I really do wish that
oh
was
heavens,
so
yes.
common. Yes. Like, yes. It is
Yeah.
so heartbreaking, but seeing it portrayed, like the soloist meant so much to me. It helped me to have a different
Hmm.
level of understanding. And another movie that we talked about the last time we talked was Caveman's Valentine.
Yes,
And I
yes.
don't know if you saw, but I
Oh
had the
yeah,
opportunity to interview Anjanou Ellis, who played
yeah,
the daughter
yeah.
um, of Samuel L. Jackson, who had the mental health
Hmm.
condition. So I was able to tell her how much that movie meant to me, and helping other people who may have a parent living
Hmm.
with severe mental illness. But that movie was just intriguing to me. Many movies,
Hmm.
shows, uh, just I like to see how they portray the person living with a mental health condition, and
Yeah.
at the same time, I want to see what the family does. The support system. If there
Hmm.
is a support system, what do they do? So while the story may be fictional or an adaptation to a real life story,
Right.
feel like I can gather some tidbits of something that might in reality help in being a caregiver of someone living with severe mental illness.
Yeah, and both of those films, um, they stand out to me also because it is so, so rare to have people of color um, in as major characters in these films.
Mhm.
And when they are, particularly for Black men, when that's the character position, they're almost always presented as A, having schizophrenia, and B, being home unhoused, um, and living on the fringe.
Mhm.
And there's a particular kind of way that the costume designers present them,
Mhm.
um, with the hair, the clothing, the piles of clothing, um, and the expectation of filth and so on. So in those representations, there are just so few. I pulled up a document, just to see. I have this long list of like 60 films that students can choose from to write a paper. There are four that have a person that is not white as the person profiled in the film who has a psychiatric disorder. Um, most of them are male. The one of the exceptions is Halle Berry's portrayal in Frankie and Alice,
Yes.
which is a really great performance. The film has issues.
Mhm.
Um, it's a complicated story because it's based in a factual narrative.
Yes.
I have no idea how much it deviates from the facts of the story because the story as it exists is kind of malleable.
Mhm.
um, I know a lot of people had strong negative reactions to the film. I mean, her performance is really great.
Mhm.
Um, but we don't see a lot of women characters who are presented to us as having schizophrenia or bipolar for that matter.
Mhm.
Those films tend to be more often male characters,
Mhm.
which is weird.
Mm.
Directors, writers, they seem much more comfortable putting women in the space of trauma-related disorders, OCD, and depression.
Mm.
One film, Gregory Hines, the great Gregory Hines, did a film called The Tick Code
Mm.
uh, uh, eons ago, um, where he played a person with Tourette's,
Interesting.
meeting
Okay.
a child who also had Tourette's.
Mm.
Um, and it was a beautiful, lovely film. But it's amazing to me just how little representation there is of people who are not white, and that is a real problem. Um, a film that I'm probably going to integrate into the course this coming fall. Finally, I have the actor who plays the lead character in Turtles All the Way Down is Isabella Merced, who uh, is Latina.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't believe that the character is written that way,
Mm.
but it's nice to see someone who isn't this cookie cutter that writers seem to think is necessary
Right.
in this genre. Um, so
So you said there were four. Can you name the others that are
uh,
on your list?
yeah, there's Caveman's Valentine with Sam Jackson, Frankie and Alice, which is about a person with dissociative identity disorder, um, The Soloist, and The Tick Code.
Okay.
Um, those are the ones that have people of color in major roles. With both The Soloist and Caveman's Valentine, even though you have A-list kind of bankable actors in those roles, they are not necessarily the drivers of the story,
Mm.
though. So,
Right.
in some ways, with both of those characters, they were presented to the audience as kind of fixing other people's problems
Mm-hmm.
despite their own problems.
Mm-hmm.
if
Yeah.
you if that makes any
Yeah,
sense.
because in Caveman's Valentine, his unique perspective was
Helps them solve
actually
the
how to solve
crime.
crime. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's been a device in television for a very long time.
Mm.
Um, in the last couple of years, I have started to see some more nuanced, more positive um, representations of particularly female characters with autism.
Mm.
Um, the first one, my husband stumbled on this one. It's originally a television show from Europe in French. I believe it was. Uh, I'm not going to say it wasn't made in France, Belgium. It was filmed there, so you had to watch with subtitles and the whole 9 yards. But you have a cop who has all kinds of problems, and she hooks up with a young woman with autism who works in the records department. Um, the nice thing about it, the show, which has now been morphed by the British into a British version of it,
Okay.
and they do it the same way. Um, for the English version, the actor herself is a person on the spectrum,
Mm.
and other actors in the show are actual people on the spectrum who are actors.
Okay.
So that is an exceptional move in a positive direction
Mm-hmm.
for films about autism in particular. And they do things like they track the protagonist's interactions with her autistic friends
Mm.
in their support group. And they talk about overwhelm and coping and challenges and relationship issues and everything else. And at the end of the day, she solves the crime,
Mm.
right?
Okay.
Um, it you know Previously, this is, to me, that show is really valuable because she's messy and she's complicated, but she's not mean.
Mm-hmm.
If you go back in the US to the TV show Monk,
Mm-hmm.
um, with, I think it was Adrian Pastar, brilliant comedic actor, hands down. But here's the model. You have a guy with trauma-induced OCD, which really isn't a thing.
Okay.
So it's his wife dies. He gets very symptomatic with OCD, can't work. He's a detective. So he's on medical leave.
Oh,
And
okay.
he's mean and dismissive, very much like Jack Nicholson in As Good as It Gets.
Mm,
He's um, narcissistic, self absorbed, cold.
mm.
He makes other people's lives miserable.
Unfortunate.
I know, and he's like a total neat freak, which is stereotypical. Um, so there are all kinds of problems, but at the end of the day, he solves the crime
Okay.
brilliantly while trying to overcome his fears. Um, but it's problematic because they're arguing that trauma causes OCD. Trauma can cause elements that look like OCD, but they're not OCD.
Mm.
So,
Okay.
OCD is one of those really strongly heritable neurological disorders.
Hmm.
And trauma can make it worse,
Wow.
much worse, um, but it's not the cause.
Hmm.
So it presented some misinformation. It also suggests that people like um, Mr. Monk are just not nice people. And if they can continue to do good works, and for him, the solution to his OCD is to solve his wife's murder.
Mm. Okay.
You
Oh,
know, for other OCD films, like one of my favorites is Matchstick Men, which is a Nicolas Cage film, which is very much Nicolas Cage being Nicolas Cage.
okay.
Um, he's one of those actors. He does brilliant work a lot of the time. And in this particular film, he's a person with OCD and Tourette's. And his depiction of living with those experiences is very authentic. It's one of the best representations I've ever seen of how a person with OCD that has that is triggered by being outside, by being in stressful environments, and just having to be out of their control space and
Mm.
having a panic episode. Um, at the same time, though, for the audience, he's a grifter. He steals money from old ladies, right? I mean, he runs these elaborate telephone scams to steal money from old people
Wow.
with his partner, and eventually he gets his comeuppance where his partner scams him
Mm.
and steals all his money, and it turns out to be okay. He got the ultimate punishment, and now he's going to clean up his life, stop being a criminal, and his OCD symptoms and his Tourette symptoms just sort of
Go.
diminish. So
Wow.
he gets the girl. He's not as messy. He's not as ill. And then they show him becoming a carpet salesman, which is just one step up from being a grifter, right?
Wow.
So there's,
But
there's
it's honest work.
yes, quite so. You sell people a piece of carpet that they don't need. Um, but yeah, uh,
So what are some more recent films, television series that depict mental health conditions, and what is your take on the presentation uh, of those conditions?
um, I don't have a specific example, but I have been heartened by the willingness of, especially medical dramas like The
Mhm.
Pit, for example,
Mm.
to kind of dip their toe in an authentic way, as fast paced as that show is. It's basically, I've only seen part of season one
Mhm.
because medical dramas aren't really my thing.
Yeah, you like murder.
Yeah, I like murder. But my one of my kids is, in training to be a physician assistant. She's all about it. It's an ER kind of drama, and they do a better job of kind of tapping into impacts of trauma in real time,
Mm-hmm.
and how people can be um, simultaneously recognized for the impacts of trauma, but at the same time stigmatized. So, like the doctors, the physicians, and the residents are really struggling with a huge traumatic event in season one,
Mm.
but they're also criticizing each other for being triggered.
Mm.
Like physicians, first responders are supposed to be above that. So they're doing a really interesting thing by kind of tapping into the reality. You know, as a medical provider, if you have mental health problems
Mm.
in real time or over time, um, you run the risk of losing your job if you own it,
Right.
if you're open about it. You run the risk of not being allowed to practice in certain areas if
Right.
you disclose, and that's incredibly problematic. It means that physicians, nurses, anyone in the medical field is going to be very resistant to being open, and to seeking care. And if they seek care, they often will do it off the books,
Right.
in order to hide it.
Right.
Um, so I appreciate that the pit is kind of allowing audiences to see in real time how that happens to
Mm.
providers, and how we're not doing a good job as a culture of making sure that our medical professionals get what they need,
Yeah.
in terms of trauma. Um, I've mentioned the autism space. The pit also has a character who's neurodivergent,
Mm.
and very clearly so, but not in the way we're used to. So we're kind of used to the good doctor version, where you have an actor who is not on the spectrum, and is actually British,
Oh.
who kind of creates this character who's very awkward. There is some authenticity to it, but it's very much in that savant space where you have autistic characters who are expected to be incredibly gifted. I
Um,
mean, abnormally gifted. So I
right.
call it the silver lining theory of
Mm.
mental illness. And in some respects, the soloist and Caveman's Valentine and Beautiful Mind do the same thing, where
Mm-hmm.
you have, in exchange for this really nasty illness that you have, or this neurological difference, you get this gift
Mm-hmm.
over
Mm-hmm.
here on the side, um, which isn't a thing.
Right. Right.
There are gifted people who have all kinds of their own challenges, mental illness and otherwise.
Right.
But most people with autism don't have a special thing in their back pocket. And
Right.
it's nice to see the pit. She's she's talented, just like every other doctor she's surrounded by. And they allow her to use her own experience as both a person who's neurodivergent, who also has a sibling who's neurodivergent. She gets to use her experience to effectively communicate with another person on the spectrum who's a patient.
Mm.
So she doesn't have a special gift to pull out of her back pocket. She's just using her lived experience to solve a
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
That is a novelty. I don't see that very often at
Yeah.
all. So I'm seeing that jumping through with the French, um, series, and then the remake of it in the British one is called Patience, and
Mm.
it's shown up on PBS channels here in the States. Um, she is who she is. She struggles, but she uses her skills, her abilities, her unique perspective to not just solve crimes, but to be a really decent friend and a good human being who continues to grow and change and develop over time. Now, the good doctor, they did allow him to grow and change and have relationships and all kinds of stuff. Um, but many people in the autism space are kind of like, yeah, but savantism is just not an expectation that you can live up to.
Mm-hmm.
for most people.
Wow.
I have seen Turtles All the Way Down is a departure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the author John Green wrote the novel, and John Green, who I adore him and his brother. Um, and I dove into tuberculosis hard with his book on everything is tuberculosis, but he is a person with OCD,
Mm-hmm.
and he had always been, according to media reports, frustrated with the way OCD had been rendered
Mm-hmm.
in the world. Um, and he sought to translate, in bringing the book Turtles All the Way Down to screen. He wanted it to be authentic. He wanted it to be right. And it took a long time. It was, for the most part, made as an independent film. So it didn't get a huge push. Um, and, the critics were kind of mixed on it. But my students love it.
Mm-hmm.
They love it, especially the ones who know someone who experiences OCD or they themselves have OCD. I had 3 students in my class this past fall who have OCD, and 2 of them profiled that film, and both were like, "Yup, I have been in that young woman's brain."
Wow.
And there's a little bit of a mystery element to it, but it doesn't over focus on. It's like her OCD doesn't solve the mystery. Her
Right.
OCD, if anything, is an impediment to her achieving some things that she wants to achieve, but it pushes her. She through the narrative, she moves from a place of refusal and denial and avoidance to accepting what she might need to do in order to live more fully
Mm-hmm.
as herself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's pretty unflinching um, as well. So I see that as a positive.
Mm-hmm.
Um, most of the schizophrenia films that we have available right now, unfortunately, still are either in the quote unquote psycho killer space, uh,
Mm.
or they're in the tortured artist space.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
I am still not seeing really good, balanced presentations of what living with schizophrenia actually looks like. Um, One of my acquaintances through NAMI years ago, the way he put it, and he's a person with schizophrenia, he was like, yeah, well, they don't want to make films that are real because recovery is boring. And I was like, truer words, man, truer words.
I think about the film that first touched me way back in 1994. Was a television movie, Out of Darkness, starring Diana
Mhm.
Ross, and that was introducing me to what would be my life, not
Yeah.
knowing yet. And it's today I can say is like one of the most authentic presentations of dealing with severe mental illness and the family trying to
Hmm.
help their loved one. And even, her trying to date, and the person,
Yes.
no longer
Yes.
wanting to date her once he knew that she had a disability, a mental health disability. Um, and then at the end, though, in terms of recovery being boring, it also is a time to help others. And that's how the
Yes.
story ended, with her seeing symptoms in someone else. And she showed an act of kindness and
Yeah.
compassion in helping that person. And
It's
then
really sad that I have not been able to find that
I
film
I found it
on.
on eBay. A friend of mine actually
Yeah,
put it on eBay for me. So like, I don't understand why it's so hard to
I
to
haven't been able to find it on streaming. We
know.
during the
YouTube.
pandemic, we had to shift to having students watch the films not live,
No.
but on a streaming service. And the service that universities can use based on copyright law didn't carry it.
Oh.
And they don't carry a lot of really good films. Like one of the best films about serious treatment-resistant depression and suicidality is an Ashley Judd film called Helen that
Oh.
almost nobody has heard of. I mean, it was an indie film, but it's one of the most powerful performances showing the degree of pain and suffering
Now that's
that people
interesting.
with depression
Yeah.
experience. And it showed how it destroyed her first marriage. It put her relationship with her teenage daughter in peril,
Mm,
and it was destroying her career. It was destroying her new marriage. And she was acutely suicidal, but
mm,
filled with shame, to the point where when she slid back into a major depressive episode, she basically walked away and hid out, hospitalized a couple of times, and then hid out with someone else that she met in the hospital. Um, but it kind of shows her eventual willingness to undergo ECT,
mhm.
which, based on film and television, people don't like it. They're like, that's torture. But who's going to walk away from an 80% success rate with
Mhm.
suicidal depression? And it shows an accurate presentation of how that treatment is delivered and how it's not magical. It takes time, and the person still has a lot of recovery work to do.
Wow.
Um, and, Ashley Judd, uh, I think the film is probably at least 10 years old, maybe more. Um, she allowed herself to be shown, like a lot of actors are not willing to do. She showed herself unattractive, unkempt, exhausted, brutalized by her experience and by just the suffering that
Yeah.
depression brings. Um, and unfortunately, I can't, it's not on the streaming service that is available. So I'm pretty sure this fall I'm going to go back to live showing, so that my students will have that audience experience
Mhm.
a bit more, because I think that matters a
Yes.
lot. Um,
That's very interesting, and I just feel that Ashley Judd would probably was able to tap into lived
mhm.
experience and seeing her mother suffer from depression and then
Yeah,
ultimately,
yeah.
unfortunately
Her
find
mother's death
suicide.
by suicide was just
Yes.
horrific
Yes.
for Ashley and for her sister. Um, just that long legacy of um, depression as it runs through the family,
Hmm.
as well as substance use issues, which
Yes.
were, she's been very forthcoming, talking about her family in that way. And she, in interviews before Helen came out, she talked about how she was attracted to the story. She was afraid that it was going to hurt her.
Mm.
So she talked to trusted people in her atmosphere, and um, really got some support from them to bring her own lived experience to the role. Um, One of my a fangirl moment, I when I was on Twitter, I'm no longer in that universe. Um, I had made a mention on my Twitter, which I only got because one of my students did their Stigma Buster project by creating a Twitter account and doing mental health facts day
Yes.
after day, and I couldn't see them unless I had my own account. So I had my account, and I posted like, showing Helen in class today, and it's one of the best. And then I did at Ashley Judd, and she commented, and I was like, oh my.
That's so cool. That's so
Yeah.
cool. Well,
There's there,
yeah,
there's
go ahead.
another film that I wish more people had seen. It's called Canvas,
Mm.
um, and it was written and directed by I'm going to blank on his name.
That's
Um,
an independent film also, right? That was in
yes,
like,
indie film, and the director, I think his last name is Greco.
Mhm.
He couldn't get it picked up by a major distributor, but he made it available to NAMI.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the best representations of the family, and especially a child's point of view,
Yes.
having a parent with a severe mental illness.
Yes.
And what this little boy, this adorable little boy, goes through. Just being in middle school is hard enough,
Right.
and then his dad is a working class guy just trying to do his best, and he's shown trying to navigate insurance and on the phone. And I, years later, now that I've had to navigate systems with my autistic young adult, I've had that same conversation that uh, Joe Pantoliano has on the screen with the phone, and going, fine, you're not going to help me, bang. you know and trying to navigate hospitals and medications, and visits with your family member when they're not quite stable.
Yes.
Like one of the most famous scenes is on Thanksgiving Day, and she just wants pumpkin pie, and she's not quite stable. She's taking a Thanksgiving weekend away from the hospital. She's in that really edgy space of she's doing better, but she's not great.
Right.
And the stress, the noise, the tensions of being out in a restaurant with your family, and she just blows up
Mm-hmm.
because they run out of pumpkin pie.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's another scene in that film that I think first responders can use as training for crisis intervention, um, where she is in distress and she's agitated, she's paranoid, she's delusional, and her husband does what most of us would do when she's in that state, but he does things that make it worse.
Mm.
Like he follows her shouting through the room, and he's trying to physically restrain her, and the kind of violence that she expresses is largely incidental.
Mm-hmm.
Like she picks up a craft knife, she's feeling threatened, and he's behaving in a threatening manner, and she accidentally slices her son.
Right.
Um, Not in a serious way, but it is what it is. So, cops are called, and the police officers in the film are shown doing things appropriately based on their training,
Mm-hmm.
um, following what's called in Florida, where the film is based, the Baker Act,
Mm-hmm.
um, and so on. So that's another film I wish got more
Yeah.
attention,
Yeah.
because it's lovely.
Yeah, it is. It's a beautiful story, and I believe I learned about it from you. And I just want to say, as we close out, we've talked about a lot of films today, and there are a lot of television programs and streaming series like on Netflix and others too. I would like to name because I feel like they show just everyday life, and these are things that just so happen to be talked about or experienced. And one is Forever, which is a reimagining of Judy Blume's book, and it's a serious
Yes.
teenage love story. But the young man has, I believe, ADHD, and it's
Yeah.
just a part of the story. It's nothing, being amplified or anything like
Right.
that. It just shows the natural occurrence and how the family deals with it, and ultimately how he deals with it for himself. And then the other series is Survival of the Thickest. It's like a comedy, but
Yeah.
they're just regular everyday conversation about going to counseling was just so empowering.
Yeah, it was really refreshing.
I
Yeah.
recorded it and posted about it just to show like this is what we mean by eliminating stigma and having and normalizing conversations about mental health and wellness. But as we close, I would love for you to give a call to action. You mentioned about your students doing the stigma buster, and I remember during our former conversation, I thought it was stigma warrior, but you gave an example of just small things that people can do. And at that time, I think you saw an ad for a shirt that had some language that was just
Yes.
stigmatizing.
Oh
And,
yeah.
so you tell us about that. And with that, lead into what you would tell us today as a call to action to help us to be stigma busters.
Yeah. Well, my students come up with really great ideas all the time, and the t-shirt issue is still an issue.
Mm,
Like you can still find t-shirts that make fun of suicide,
mm,
um, that equate schizophrenia with violence. Mostly they're on um, websites that like Redbubble, that are supposed to be fringy, so they really don't care.
mm,
You know, if you write in and you talk about it, they really don't care. The bigger companies like Amazon, they can be compelled, if you are persistent,
mhm,
to remove products. It's really hard though. So we've done some things like that. A lot of my students right now, though, they're really focused on how to reach their fellow students.
mm,
Um, so what a couple of the groups did this last year was to really focus on pulling together their particular social group and to talk about their own experiences,
mm,
which I thought was a really interesting way to go at busting stigma. You know, stigma busting can be everything from really big actions like bringing in a speaker, having an event, that kind of thing, or it can be very micro, where you invite your close group of friends and you watch a movie and then you work through the process that we work through in class. Or I had a computer science student many years ago who was like, how about if I create a website that has a fact of the day generator and it's all mental health content? He did that because that was in his wheelhouse. I've had a bunch of students do public service announcements,
mm,
um, make pamphlets, do hall programs, that are really designed to just reach people where they are. Um, you know, out in the wild, what that tends to give them is permission. So they practice it for this assignment, and then they find themselves doing it more.
mhm,
Um, Historically, my favorite stigma buster of all time was one young man who was diagnosed with ADHD, and he'd always been very secretive about it. He was ashamed of it. Um, his parents didn't want him talking about it. They didn't want him perceived to be weak or whatever. And his father's a physician. So he kind of sat down and he's like, okay, I'm going to educate dad,
mm,
who knows the stuff, but I want to convince him to allow me to educate his patients.
mm,
So he created a pamphlet. He worked with his dad. He interviewed his dad. He did all of this sort of background stuff. And then his dad came around to saying, you know what, you're right. We need to provide these resources to my patients.
oh, that's
Um, so, you know, stigma busting can be uh, anything you want to make it. The key is to educate yourself so that you can educate others,
yeah.
in whatever way works for you.
Mhm,
And I encourage my students to make it something that means something to you.
mm,
Make it something that is important to you. This last year, and I could go on and on about this one. One student who has a sibling on the spectrum decided to make a documentary, and she's not a filmmaker. She's a biomed major, but she basically pulled all these family members in who, you know, autism tends to have a genetic component. So she had in her family universe many individuals who are caretaking
mhm,
a person with autism. And she interviewed them and just asked them questions, had them tell their stories, what their struggles are, what their reality is like. And she then posted this on YouTube. And she felt like, you know, her reflection was, this completely transformed my thinking about what autism is
mm,
and what it means for
mhm,
people.
mhm,
It's not just the person with autism, it's
right.
the whole family system. that's connected, and how she had no idea what her aunt was going through, no idea of all these systematic challenges that
Mhm.
her parents went through, this and and so on. So those are really powerful experiences of personal growth and revelation. So stigma busting doesn't have to be you go out and change the world. It may, in fact, just be you go inside and you change your own thinking.
Mhm.
And that's my primary goal with the whole class, is to change the way people process information
Mhm.
about mental illness, so that they have more compassion, more empathy, more openness, not just for people with mental illness, but for everybody who's in their atmosphere as well.
Well, I will take that as the call to action. Do your part to be a stigma buster. And a part of this Mental Wealth Wednesday is doing just that. It's my effort of busting stigma, increasing knowledge and awareness, and ultimately helping people to help others, to be an
And
advocate.
you do amazing work, Corey.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for being a part of this programming and helping to educate the audience. I truly appreciate you taking time out. Um, it's been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you so much. And
Thank
thank you
you.
all for joining us this evening for Mental Wealth Wednesday. Stay tuned next month for another episode every fourth Wednesday of each month. Have a great evening.